Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Maricella Herrera. I'm not your usual host, Kristy Wallace, who is somewhere in a meeting, I would assume, because she stood me up. But also, I'm laughing and I'm saying this because I know she'll listen to it and then give me grief about it. But hey, Kristy, I'm just kidding. I'm really happy to have a few minutes to talk to you all before we go into our episode because I've been working on a really exciting project at Ellevate. We've been really hard at work on our upcoming Mobilize Women Week, which will happen from August 24th to August 28th. It is the virtual experience of our yearly summit. So we've been doing the Mobilize Women Summit for 4 years now, and it's such an impactful and powerful day, usually in New York City, where we have thought leaders from all industries, from all walks of lives, and we're all there to talk about how we can make the world a more equitable and just place. This year, because of everything that's been going on, we have changed the format. It's a virtual event, but it is through the span of 1 week. So there will be sessions throughout the week. We did Kristy and I did an Instagram Live last week to talk a lot more in detail about speakers and topics, because we have everything from mental health and how you take care of yourself first to how you can really make an impact in your work through building culture within your company that is really focused and centered on humans and our needs as humans to belong, and to how do we create a broader change in the world through women in politics and just allyship and advocacy. I think it's more important than ever that we have these conversations, that we continue to have a place where like-minded individuals who think that the world can change, who believe that if we take action and mobilize for good, we can create a better place. And that's what Mobilize Women Week is all about. It's about action. So would love for all of you to join us. It's free. You can register on our website, ellevatenetwork.com/summit. And you can see there all of our speakers. It's a really great lineup, topics that we will be discussing, and more information about past and the future summit. And so that was kind of a plug I wanted to do. But now we're going to go into our conversation, or Kristy's conversation, with Jill Johnson, who is incredible, and I believe fits right in with what I'm saying about Mobilize Women. She is the co-founder and CEO of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership. She is really, really focused on how to connect women of color entrepreneurs, and Black angels and investors particularly, so that we can diversify the funding side, but also make sure that we are supporting the small businesses that are being created by Black and other women of color. She talks about how she got her start as an entrepreneur, what is happening to small businesses through the pandemics, the specific challenges that come with being a Black entrepreneur, and how being an ally in the business world is really important as we continue to evolve. And so as we've seen, and our community is so much about action and so much about supporting each other and supporting small businesses, we've partnered with Jill on a way that the Ellevate community can offer your expertise and your skills to volunteer and support small businesses. It's something that's very important for us, that we can help the businesses that need support. And we know that our community likes giving back, and there are really, really smart and talented people within the Ellevate community. So I'm sure the small businesses that are looking for expertise and looking for support would be incredibly grateful for your time. So if you want to sign up, go to smallbusinessesneedus.org/team Ellevate. Again, the website where you can sign up to volunteer your expertise and support small businesses is smallbusinesses needus.org/Team Ellevate. And that's Ellevate with 2 L's. And now on to Kristy's interview with Jill.
Jill, thanks so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It is truly wonderful to have you here.
It's great to be here, Kristy.
You and I have had some really powerful conversations in the past. I'm a huge admirer of the work that you do and the impact you're having. But our audience might not know so much about Jill Johnson. So would you mind sharing a bit about who you are and how you got where you are today?
Sure, happy to. And yes, I have really enjoyed our conversations as well. So my journey toward the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership really starts with my parents and growing up as the daughter of entrepreneurs. My parents had a newspaper publishing business that they had for about 20 years. It was a newspaper called City News. It started out as Plainfield Today, which is where I grew up. And then they moved it to Newark. So they were very involved in just the Newark community for a really long time. And I grew up in a household where we were always working. It's funny, my father didn't really believe in us having outside jobs, and he believed in us being kids. But at the same time, having a family business meant that we were working in the business. So I got used to really long hours and just being part of the business. My father would always talk about having this business as something that was an opportunity to provide jobs, and where his kids and people in the family would never have to want for a job. And that's really how so many Black business owners thought about their businesses. It's how a lot of people still think about their businesses. And it wasn't until I worked at Goldman Sachs right out of college, I did the financial analyst program at Goldman Sachs, where I there had the experience to see people who started businesses, grew those businesses to a very significant size, and then they were able to extract the value when they sold the businesses, and they created a lot of wealth. That was not a trajectory with which I had been familiar. It really started to occur to me, why is it that more women and minority-owned businesses aren't doing that same thing? And that's really what got me started thinking differently about small business, the value of small business, what small business meant, and really the direction that it could go and the impact that it could have for families and building wealth. So a lot of that really has created the foundation for where I am today, my thinking today, and for the foundation for the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership.
I love that story. I also, my dad was a dentist when I was growing up. And so my sister and I started working, I guess probably, when we were 10 or maybe earlier, like reorganizing his files. And but it was very much, it was really about, okay, especially when you're an entrepreneur, your business is your life, it's your family, it's your future. And it's so much about how do you get everyone involved in that, and ingrained in what that business is all about. And I just love that story that you shared and kind of the ethos of that, and how
there's no turning it off, right?
No, there's not. But it's when you dig deeper into that, you have children, I have children. There's been a lot of conversations about the impact of our world today, of COVID, of the economy and beyond on children and, the world, their future and how they see their future and their place in the world. But to bring it back to our backgrounds and being children of entrepreneurs, we also know that small businesses, particularly those owned by women and people of color, are really struggling during the pandemic. Didn't have access to a lot of the government funding, are losing their livelihoods, are going under. And the pandemic is really reshaping that entrepreneurial landscape. And so when you tie it back to how we started about, being children of entrepreneurs, I just keep thinking about today's children of entrepreneurs and the kind of just multitudes of impacts that this time will have on them in their future. So, given just your, huge influence and passion for this community, could you share a little bit about your thoughts on, how small businesses, particularly those of women and people of color, are being hurt during the pandemic, and what we as consumers, we as allies, we as listeners should be thinking about, and what steps we should be taking?
Sure. Kristy, it's really interesting when I speak with people that I haven't spoken to in a bit. The first question, I'm sure you get this too, is, how are you doing? How are things? Are you healthy? How are you feeling? And my response is generally, I'm great, doing well. But I have to tell you, the thing that makes me really nervous and what is very, very unsettling for me right now is what I feel is happening with small businesses. And I don't think that a lot of people really understand what we could be facing as far as the small business economy. And I think that there were a lot of businesses that managed to hold on. And, as you know, that's the nature of being an entrepreneur is you do what you can to hold on. And for many people, as you said, this is their livelihood. They've put everything that they have into their business. And again, for women and people of color, they may not have a lot. And so they've put whatever they have into the business. So the thought of seeing that just being washed away before their very eyes is very concerning. And I don't know that the general public really understands that most small businesses just don't have the resources to sustain this type of disruption and interruption to business. And despite the fact that there is reopening that's happening, being open at 25% or 50% capacity, the economics of that just don't work. And, one entrepreneur said to me, well, I'm opening at 25% capacity, but my expenses are 100%. I still have to pay my employees and, maybe you can scale that back, but your utility cost, your rent costs, a lot of those costs are still at 100%. So the economics just don't work out. And my real fear is that the businesses that have been holding on, if there isn't more relief, more help, more support, they're just going to see the writing on the wall and throw in the towel. So I don't think we have reached at all anywhere close to the bottom of what we could potentially see with small businesses.
Yeah, I'd read somewhere a typical small business, and Jill, I'm sure you know these numbers better than I do. My understanding, small businesses represent 95% of businesses in the United States. They're typically categorized as businesses that have 500 or less employees and employ roughly, I want to say it's like 45% of the workforce.
Yeah, no, that's about right. It's the non-governmental portion of the workforce. Yes.
And then a typical small business owner may have about 13 days of cash in reserves, and which means that when you look at the expenses, it may be inventory, production, payroll, rent, utilities, insurance, all of these expenses. If suddenly your cash flow dries up or drastically drops, and many of these businesses are not, huge profit centers. I mean, you're doing it to support yourself, your family, your community. But with, COVID specifically, when we suddenly see such an about face in terms of consumer spending and how we're supporting small businesses, there's just not a lot of runway with which to quickly navigate changes in your business to then really be able to sustain your dreams, to sustain your livelihood, the work that you've put so much blood, sweat, and tears into.
Yeah, for many of them, there's no runway, and the runway that they did have was really if they were to continue to operate in the same way in which they had been operating to that point. So when you talk about having to do a pivot, operate differently, different logistics, figuring out new target markets, employing new technology so that you can reach those new markets, they weren't equipped for this investment that would have to occur to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, and when you look more deeply at the landscape, over the last 10 years, businesses founded by Black, Indigenous, people of color account for more than 50% of those 2 million new businesses that started in the United States over the last 10 years. But we've also seen the data and statistics that specifically Black entrepreneurs and business owners and women of color have been really, and we talked about this a few minutes ago, like really impacted by COVID, but also I think by, a lot of the other things happening in our world, racism, bias, discrimination. What trends are you seeing? What opportunities, what obstacles? Where are we going from here?
Interesting question. And that has so many layers to it. For many Black entrepreneurs, there's always been a crisis, and they've always been in a deficit position, not having the capital, not having the resources, not having the networks and general access that helps businesses to be successful and to thrive. So when we look at COVID, while it impacted businesses, small businesses across the board, and even large businesses, as we all know, um, the impact has been more devastating to Black businesses because there isn't the runway, there isn't the cushion, there's not the safety net. So if you don't, again, have those resources, when one thing goes wrong, it potentially puts you out of business. So, kind of that whole notion of failing forward and learning from your mistakes, that becomes really difficult when you don't have the resources to recover from those mistakes and to move in a new direction. I think that even, as I look at it, focusing on what has been happening present day is really the wrong place to start in having this conversation. The genesis of the issues related to the success of Black businesses starts with the legacy of slavery. And I think that often the conversation doesn't extend back that far to recognize the true issues and the systemic nature, deep-seated, systemic nature of the issues that Black businesses are facing and that Black entrepreneurs are facing. Often the conversation is around the lack of knowledge or lack of preparedness or what they don't have or what they need to do or not having credit and collateral, all those issues. But many of those, again, are rooted in systemic barriers and the challenges that have been related to the legacy of slavery. So I think that while more people are now being awakened, if you will, and they have had their eyes opened to many of the issues, I think we really have to make sure that everyone is learning the history and becoming more aware and enlightened about the origin of these challenges.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and thank you for saying that, and thank you for those insights. I mean, I, as a white person, I think about this a lot because it has to be something we commit to for life, right? This has to be not just a moment in time, or let's support Black businesses today, or let's ask the tough questions and really pick apart some of these scenarios and situations if it's PPP, but that's one scenario around funding. There's many other instances to look at and to go deeper into those systems and structures that created that. But it needs to be a lifelong journey that we're committed to and that we're constantly working towards.
And let me add something to that. I think that a lot of people like you have made that decision that there has to be um, just more thought, more intentionality. And I want to really stress that intentionality has to be 360 in every aspect of everyone's lives. That it's not enough just in your personal life to say that you're going to get involved and march along and stand with, but then in your professional life, you continue business as usual. And so, it's interesting that while there has been, again, so much talk about the need for inclusion, we have to do things differently. How many communications I've still seen that are not inclusive one bit. I just saw an image this morning. It was an event that is happening, an event that's happening in a state, and meant to represent a large constituency within a state. And the photo showed a picture with no Black person in it at all. And it was something for women. And there was not a Black person and no one of visible or recognizable ethnicity, if you will. And so, I'm looking at that and saying, wow, with all this talk that's going on, and still people are not even stopping to look at the images that they're using to represent events or different things that they're doing or information that's being made available, and looking at who their target market is. And I don't know, maybe that photo was indicating who their target market is, which to me, that's what it signals. But I think that people really have to stop and take a look. I mean, this is not natural. We have to retrain ourselves, right? Everyone has to do that. So it's stopping and being very intentional in every aspect of our lives to say, you know what, are we taking a moment to do things differently to make sure that we are including more people?
Yeah. And thank you also for, pointing out that intersection of professional and personal, right? Because I think we've talked a lot on the podcast and within our community how oftentimes you walk into the workplace and you feel like you have to leave your identity at the door, and that is not the time for that, anymore. We have to, speak up around what we're seeing in the workplace. If you are someone with the power to make those decisions, if it's from the vendors you use to the images to the language, it's it's always been time to speak up, but now more than ever and into the future, it is very intentional of looking at all of these instances and ways that we need to do better, and we need to question the way that things have always been done.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the only way that you actually build an inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. That, it can't be some people over here or this is for the general public, and then over here we're going to do this subset and just target Black people or Latinx or some specific group. That when we're doing events generally, the events need to reflect an interest in everyone's well-being within the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I think that in some ways we make this harder than it really is, right? If you just think about the people who you help in general and the people for whom you've opened doors, there are people who know, like, and trust, and people who, for some reason, you really believe in them, believe in their cause or whatever it is they're doing, and you want to see them succeed. And so if more of us spend time just developing friendships and just getting to know each other, that inclusivity ends up becoming much more natural, because you're then just helping, people who like, and trust. The challenge is that, and that's very natural, right? Like that's just human nature to do that. The challenge has been that historically people know, like, and trust often people who look just like them, and you have that pattern matching. So it's if I want to support successful people or people who I believe will be on a successful trajectory, they have to be people who look like me, because those are the people who I know who are likely to have a positive outcome. And so, by not knowing enough people who are different, who also have that same success trajectory, you just don't have an idea that that is possible. And so, when you know more people who are different, um, your vision of what success is, or what success can be, or who can produce those successful outcomes changes. So I just think so much of this is based on relationships and people getting to know each other.
It's so true. Jill, let's talk about funding and access to funding. In your opening, you discussed working in banking when you started out your career. And now it's kind of the other side of the impacts of banking. Can you speak about the challenges that Black entrepreneurs have in funding their companies? And what does that look like, and what do we need to be paying attention to?
Sure. Well, Kristy, it still goes back to the legacy of slavery, that for centuries, Black people were not permitted to own and were kept from owning. And even after slavery was over, there were still laws enacted to keep people from owning. And, we still see some of the challenges associated with that even today, barriers that are put in place that really are designed to make ownership much more difficult. So, when you think of, again, ownership is what leads to wealth creation. So if you don't have wealth, it's difficult then to have the resources to even start your businesses. Unlike the media sort of makes it seem that everyone's going out and getting VC capital, as we know, the reality is that very, very few businesses get venture capital or are even a fit for venture capital at all. That's just such a small percentage. But when you think about how most businesses are in fact funded, it's through personal savings and friends and family. Well, if you don't have wealth, then you don't have access to that personal savings, nor to the friends and family money. So you're starting off at a deficit if you don't have that early capital to get the business off the ground, to gain some traction. That makes it much more difficult to get any other form of capital, including bank capital. So while, again, there's a lot of talk about what banks are not doing and banks not being able to lend or not lending. And, I don't want to take any pressure off of financial institutions. There's enough blame to go around. But what we have to realize is that is still not um, the crux of the problem. That's still not the origin. It is really, again, addressing the issues related to the legacy of slavery and Black communities not having the wealth that is needed to fund business startup or business growth.
Well, and you're really tackling this from many different angles. One of which is the initiative Making Black Angels, which you started a few years ago to increase the number of Black investors. Tell me a little bit about this. As you and I have discussed, I'm an angel investor, and really part of it was pipeline angels, and part of what Talia talks about is you can't be what you can't see. And so we really need to change the face of investing and how we create that family and friends round, how we specifically, to your point from earlier, look about creating that inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem where it's not just investing in people who look just like you, which, we've heard a lot about in the more traditional funding spaces, the challenges with that, but really looking beyond that to support entrepreneurs of different identities, and specifically Black entrepreneurs, and how we do more.
Yeah, so we started the Making of Black Angels as a campaign to promote diversity and inclusion within the angel investing sector. What I started to realize, it's easy being in the Northeast and having worked at Goldman, and my husband's in the private equity space, and just being in our world, it's easy to think that, oh, just everyone knows about angel investing and just the different forms of capital. And I was talking with a friend from one day who had been in the banking industry and the real estate arena for many, many years. She was senior in her firm. And I was mentioning something about angel investing, and she kind of looked at me with a blank stare. Like, what do you mean angel investing? Like, people get together and pull their money and invest in companies. How does that happen? How do you get involved in these groups? And so we ended up doing a workshop at one of our events last year in 2019. And it was very well received. And we had some people from different angel groups that were there speaking. And we just again began to see that her response and the fact that she didn't know was something that was not unique to her, that this was very common. And we ended up having more events, and we were seeing more Black people who were high earners. They had some financial capacity, certainly, but they had never been introduced to angel investing. And it got me even thinking that angel investing, I keep going back to relationships and the power of relationships. I don't know how you actually got introduced to pipeline, but in so many cases, people are introduced from someone that they know. The person says, "Oh, there's a deal I'm investing in," or, "Oh, there's a company we're considering, or I'm part of this group." And they invite a friend to attend a meeting or into the deal or to get involved. And what we started to see is that many Black people in um, in professional circles with people who are angel investors had never been invited to participate in an angel group or in a deal of any kind. So we wanted to really create a forum for increasing the awareness just about angel investing and the role that angel capital plays in the capital continuum and why it's important as far as the overall conversation about access to capital for Black entrepreneurs. And while we talk about the wealth gap, and we know that there is one, there are Black people who have accumulated wealth, who have made high income for many years. They've done very well. And because this is not something that they know from just growing up and hearing their parents and family members talking about investing in businesses, it's something where we now have to create that awareness, and we're looking to activate these folks into the investor community.
I love that you're doing this, and you're doing even more to support small businesses. You started an initiative through the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership around Small Businesses Need Us, a way for communities to come together and to commit their resources, money, insights, knowledge, spending power to support small businesses during this time. Ellevate is working with you on this, and we encourage all the listeners and our Ellevate community to take action and go to smallbusinessesneedus.org/team Ellevate. But Jill, can you share more about this and why it's so important?
Sure. Kristy, this really was born out of the fear that I mentioned a little earlier, that I just think that small businesses are being devastated in a way that we just cannot even imagine yet, and that we haven't seen. So out of my concern, my nature is always just to kind of do something, not to just think about what the problem is or to recognize that there's a problem, but what can we do about this? And going back to my real focus around relationships. I said, so if you don't have capital, what's the next best way to get access to things that you need and to resources? Well, it's through relationships. And I know there have been so many people in my network who have contributed to any successes that I've ever had It's through the power of, those relationships and being able to go to them and ask for help and ask for support, of them being willing to offer it up. And so small businesses need us really is an effort to activate business professionals. And what we say is that just as medical professionals have been on the front lines saving lives, we need our business professionals to get on the front lines to help save small businesses. So, whatever time it is that someone has, they can use that to volunteer their expertise. We put you on a team matched based on the expertise that you have and the needs of that individual small business. And our goal is to help to get them over any barriers that they're having to their survival and then eventually to their growth. On a much deeper level, Kristy, we believe that it's also a way to get more people to know each other and to with each other and to communicate so that more people understand what it is to be a small business owner and the challenges that they face. And especially if you're working with an entrepreneur who has been undercapitalized and who is facing greater barriers, you're better able to understand just, again, the unique position of that entrepreneur. And we want to, help people to create relationships, to build friendships, to work across lines, and to get to know each other in a much more authentic way.
Jill, thank you for the work you're doing. That truly is building an inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem. You are driving it and making it a reality. And it's an honor to support your efforts and to know you personally.
Thank you. And we're excited to have Ellevate with us.
Well, I'm going to end with a little lightning round so we can get to know you a little bit better. This is always really fun. And I have some questions for you if you could answer in one sentence or less. Jill, are you an introvert or extrovert?
I'm an introvert who's forced to be public far beyond my general comfort level.
I always love that question. It's interesting, the answers. What's your favorite day of the week?
Friday, because I usually leave that for fun, relaxed meetings.
Early bird or night owl?
Night owl, always have been.
Who's your dream dinner guest?
Michelle Obama, without question.
Oh, yes. What is your pet peeve?
All right, I'm going to take the liberty of two here. People not putting things where they belong and eating finger foods at networking events.
Oh, I love it. That's good. That is really good. Your Monday morning staple?
I like to get prepared on Sundays to start the week. So looking at my calendar for the week and just making sure I'm on top of everything.
What's your favorite recent read?
Amazing book, Born a Crime. And that's by Trevor Noah. And it really touches on so many of the issues that we have been discussing. And I actually encourage people to listen to it because it's in his voice and it is just amazing as he tells it.
I'm going to get it now. I will listen to it later. What is your top self-care practice?
Walking, listening to my music that kind of gets me motivated.
And what's one final thought you'd love to leave with our listeners?
Thanks for that opportunity, Kristy. So I would say the question that I would have for people is, what are you going to do differently to include others in your personal life and in your professional network? And if you include enough others, in quotes, and you're intentional about building relationships, they will no longer be others. They'll just be your friends. And that's how inclusion happens.
Jill, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It was really wonderful to catch up with you and to hear about the important work you're doing and how much we all have to learn, to do, to take action, to be intentional, and to make this world better and more equitable for all.
Kristy, thanks for having me. Thank you to the Ellevate community. And I really appreciate your efforts, your authenticity, and your allyship.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Ellevate NTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.